They're just dropping the agenda into the chat so you can sort of see what's coming up. I'll be doing an introduction for a few minutes, and then Cleo will move over to the exciting part that you're here for, which is presenting the paper. And then we will hear from 3 amazing of our guest speakers, and then do a panel discussion for sort of 15 minutes, and then we'll do a 40-minute question and answer session, because we really want to make sure that you've all got your questions answered with our time here today. And then we'll just close. We'll aim to do that for 7:30 and no later, because you're all giving us such a lovely chunk of your time this evening already. We don't want to overspill. Okay. Brilliant. I think we will make a start in the interest of time. We will be recording this, so if anyone does miss the start, we'll be able to send you the link so you don't miss anything. So firstly, thank you everyone for being here this evening. It's a really exciting time for us here, and it's just a real pleasure to share it with you. So I'm Jo. I am the Basic Income for Farmers Coordinator, and I guess how this thing happened was sort of from a place of struggle, really. I transitioned into food growing, training as an organic horticulturist, veg grower in 2021. And I was sort of stuck in that really weird limbo space of not being able to find paid traineeships, but not having enough experience to secure paid work. So I, for a year and a half, was living on very, very little. And I don't think if I didn't bring veg home from work, I honestly don't know if I'd be able to buy food each week. So it came from a place of struggle. But in that, I was able to talk to other people in the sector, and thankfully and thankfully found that it was quite commonplace that this struggle was happening. So I started thinking on solutions, and I started dreaming of a world where there was a foundational payment for farmers, food producers and farm workers in the UK. So I thought it was quite a good idea, and I put the idea out there, and lots of people came back, and I hosted 4 online conversations between March 2023 and August 2023, and sort of those conversations using the basic income toolkit sort of was the foundations to this discussion paper that we'll be launching this evening. It was really, really exciting. We had a core group of individuals who were really committed and wanted to form a working group. So we started working on this discussion paper as a working group together, with the immense support of Cleo Goodman from the Basic Income Conversation. We've just been working quietly on this report in the background, but also we've done an online survey where over 110 people have got back to us, which is amazing. And we did a session at Oxford Real Farming Conference where we had over 70 farmers, farm workers and food producers in attendance, which was just incredible. So that's where we get to now. So sort of just as a very, very basic, what do we mean when we say a basic income for farmers? We mean a regular, unconditional cash payment directly made to farmers and agricultural workers. And I'm sure the question of how much is going to come up very quickly. So at this point, we're just saying enough to provide genuine financial security to the people who grow our food. And we will be working on modelling to produce an adequate and feasible number for that in sort of our next phase of work. And just before I pass over to Cleo, who will do the exciting part with the paper, I just wanted to thank our core group, working group. Dot, Hamish, Katie, Jake, Jazz, Dr. Dave, thank you for all your support. We would not be here if it wasn't for you. And thank you to our supporters, organisations who have been in touch with us right from the very start, sort of motivating us and propelling us to do more and better, which is incredible. So thank you to the Oxford Real Farming Conference, Land Workers Alliance, Organic North, Urban Agriculture Consortium, Feedback, Open Food Network, Better Food Traders, Food Futures North Lancashire, UBI Lab Food, Bath UBI Beacon, and the Citizens Basic Income Trust. Again, we wouldn't be anywhere like where we are now without your help. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Cleo. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jo. Yeah, and thank you all for being here. I'm immediately getting a notification that my internet connection is unstable. So that's a bad sign, but hopefully if it's really unstable to the point of being useless, someone will shout out and we can work out a different plan. I'm going to share my screen because I've made some slides. My name's Cleo, as we've said, and I run a project called Basic Income Conversation for an organisation called Autonomy. We talk to people about basic income, but this is such an exciting part of our work at the moment, and really delighted to share an exclusive insight into the new report, Sowing the Seeds of Stability, with you tonight. This is, as Joe's just said, the culmination of this first phase of work and conversations with dozens and dozens of people who have such deep expertise in producing food, such an essential part of an economy that is often overlooked and is not currently working for them. So I'm going to talk a bit about what we found and where we've started. And I've started off with the wrong slide deck, so you're going to have to bear with me as I stop sharing here. I will keep talking though, hopefully relatively coherently. So the idea, as Joe said, of a basic income for farmers is similar to a basic income of any kind, that it is a completely unconditional cash payment that people receive regardless of their circumstance. But in this case, it is paid only to people who are farmers, farm workers, or food producers. And the point of this is to acknowledge the kind of key role in the short term that these people doing this in essential and important labour play in the short term in terms of building a stable future for our food systems and for our economy, the foundation of our economy, as I have said. Basic Income for Farmers is also the campaign group that Joe is coordinating and that has been producing such impressive outputs and building such important relationships and networks in this space to sort of drive forward this really crucial conversation about how we transform the economy of this sector. I think I found the right slides now, which is good, and I'll be able to give you a sneak peek of our beautiful report cover, which I'm very excited to reveal for the first time to you once I reshare my screen. Yes, so the purpose of this Sowing the Seeds of Stability paper is to inform and instigate a really detailed investigation of how a basic income for farmers could work for the UK, and also acknowledging that agricultural policy is a devolved policy, so also looking at policies designed specifically in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and England individually through devolved governments. We've also worked to lay out the case for the policy through outlining the problems in the current systems, and also speaking to the people who are at the heart of all of this and making sure that we're working with them to design something that doesn't recreate the failures of the current system. And then the final and probably the most useful offering that this report has, this discussion paper has, is outlining the big questions as a framework for future work. So yeah, we're intending that this is the first stage, and the next stage is to really answer these big questions and design a basic income for farmers policy with a lot of specifics. So yeah, moving on to the first section, which is the problem. The summary of the problem is that the majority of farmers have insecure incomes, and basic income could guarantee them financial security that would be better for their work, their health, and their well-being. We've seen this problem coming to a head recently, and people aren't leaving this. The farming people in farming are doing a lot to fight back on this, and we're really keen that this this conversation, and this policy is put on the agenda for the future of the transition that British farming is currently facing. So key problem with food systems in the UK are that despite having the lowest food prices, the UK has the highest levels of food insecurity in Europe. So cheap food does not serve us, and it does not serve farmers, and it does not provide them with a decent livelihood while they are doing the work to produce this. This is an important moment in history to address these problems, because we are currently in the transition process from EU subsidy schemes for farmers and for farms to UK government schemes after Brexit. And independent and government modelling shows that there are going to be massive financial gaps left for these farms, despite the replacement policies. So the final point is that there is an incredibly low yield, apologies for the pun there, of new workers in farming, just because of how many barriers, not just because of how many barriers they face financially, but that is a really key part of that. So a part of the solution we suggest in the discussion paper is a basic income for farmers, farm workers and food producers. And as we've said, this is an unconditional cash payment to a predetermined group of those people that they would receive on a regular basis. We believe that this is part of the solution because of the projected health and well-being improvements. As we were just saying, farmers are disproportionately affected by various things because of the conditions of their work, and that includes mental health. That should be a national shame. We should be looking after these people better, these workers better, and we are just not. Basic income, the pilots that have been done in the past show clear links to improvements in health and well-being. Largely this mechanism is through a reduction in stress due to an increase in financial security. So we'd expect that this would be transferable to a basic income for farmers. And this makes it a very direct way of approaching that financial insecurity and improving these knock-on outcomes. A basic income for farmers. Can we make sure folks are muted, please? Thank you. A basic income for farmers would make farming a viable livelihood, supplementing this sort of different supply chain of a business model for a farm is a strange thing to impose on something that is essential as food production and distribution, and the livelihood of producing that food shouldn't be dependent on that. So this is a way of circumventing that and making sure that is a given, that financial security is a given, and that the livelihood is always viable. It's a policy for the Just Transition Toolkit. There's lots of changes in practices that need to be done to transition to a sustainable future, and that is particularly true in our food systems. So a basic income would allow farmers to take risks and to develop new methods, and those to be particularly driven by sustainability and environmental concerns. So a basic income would invest in that. Coming back to this question of, how does this fit into the conversation about universal basic income? 99% of the farmers consulted for this paper wanted a UBI for all. So understanding that financial insecurity across the board is something that affects them and their work, but also that is something that needs to be addressed. So this isn't a diversion from the fight for a UBI. It's just acknowledgement of the short-term nature of this problem and as something that needs to be addressed immediately, due to climate-related issues, but also the kind of historic moment of subsidy changes at this point. People, this is the key. This is where Joe's fantastic work with basic income for farmers and the working group and everyone that I've met so far, and this it's absolutely at the heart of this, and where we need to keep building this proposal from if it's going to avoid replicating the problems of the existing system. And one of the questions in the conversations that were had that fed into this report was what would these payments mean for you? And yes, similarly as the experience that we've all shared of the farmer that's sort of getting this basic income payments. Basics and essentials were a key part of that, both I think personally and for the work that they do. Long-term investments, again, knowing, people were mentioning health and safety risks that they were very aware of in their farm, but unable to address because of a lack of ability to make long-term investments. And I think also very crucially, personal and leisure time. That piece is how we address that health and wellbeing crisis, by allowing people to have more personal time, more leisure time, more money for leisure activities, and again that choice over how they spend that time. Policy. So this is the key part that we're supposed to be giving you answers to, and unfortunately there's lots of more questions probably than we have answers, but that's the stage that we're at with this. This is an emerging conversation. This is us moving the Overton window around this policy and around the way that we work with farmers, or develop policy for work with farmers to develop policy for farmers. And the next stage of this work really does will be Joe and I working to bring people together to answer these big questions. In this report, we've done a lot of discussion and we have outlined these big questions, so we're dead keen to hear from you on the answers to this. Eligibility is a sort of opaque word to say, who is it that we are talking about? Who would receive these payments? How do we put borders around the group to make sure that people are able to access the payments? They know who to go to ask to be signed on to this scheme, and they know that they will be guaranteed this payment for the period that it would be available to them. But how do we do that in a way that doesn't cause rifts in communities and in the kind of interaction of different skills and disciplines in the sector? So it's a really big question, a really complicated one that we're at quite early days of answering. But I think something that came out really strongly in the report, or in the work we've done so far, is that small scale farmers need to be better catered to for these kind of policies. And that at the moment, despite the importance or the potential of small scale farming, in particularly in urban areas, about making sure that we have less food miles, the kind of financial side of that type of farming is not supported enough at the moment, and historically in different schemes, and the ones that they're being replaced with at the moment. Payment level and frequency, of course, you could have a basic income of £50 a week, and that would be one thing, and you could have £500 a week, and that would be another thing. So how much it is and when it reaches people is really important. It also needs to be deeply connected to the funding for the policy. It has to be sustainable. It can't be something that is, only done in the short term, and that doesn't kind of work at the back end to address the kind of systemic issues that led to policy being so poor, or to farming being so poorly remunerated. It has to be working on both sides, getting money to people and moving money around into places that it should be, from places where it is currently stacked up and not being used. Infrastructure for delivery is really important. There might be issues with digital isolation. We're looking at thinking about how previous policies, the new UK government subsidies perhaps might be a useful place to look at, to design these mechanisms for delivering these payments. But it needs to be very simple. There needs to be no hoops to jump through, and it should be as universal as possible, possibly connected to HMRC, as this is a universal system. Interaction with other schemes, that means the subsidies that I've mentioned several times now, but also with social security, also with taxes. It needs to make sure that the basic income payment doesn't remove any other essential income for the people that are supposed to be benefiting from the basic income scheme, that we think about how it fits into the wider policy landscape. And the political pathway, this is the final point here. It's only going to be relevant if we can actually look at, if we actually have a path mapped out to this becoming a reality. It's very key that this is explored both in devolved nations and devolved governments, because it is a devolved policy area, but also looking at it for a UK-wide rollout as well, so matching up all those pieces. We think pilots, as have been mentioned, are very, very valuable to case making and evidence generation, particularly, like I say, as this is an emerging conversation. And again, just another hat tip for a lot of people not wearing hats, doing lots of hat tipping, to Joe and the Basic Income for Farmers team, who, we intend to continue working with them to produce policy and pilot proposals in the next phase of work. And this is also relevant to all of you, because this is going to be a deeply consultative process. So we hope that you'll continue to engage with us.
Janine is a farmer just outside of Manchester, and wears many, many hats, coordinating lots of different groups, and does so much work for outreach. And I'll pass over to Janine to tell us a bit more about her story and why a basic income for farmers might be important for her.
So hello, everybody. Yes, like Joe said, my name is Janine, and I work and own an organic farm in Greater Manchester, in a place called Chatmoss, which is situated in Salford. Farming wasn't the start of my journey. I started in 2010, after having my first child when he reached 2. I just discovered that I wanted a new way of living. So the opportunity, I worked very, very kind of long hours. So the opportunity came up to purchase a farm. Now, farming has been in the generation through my grandfather and grandparents, but I just wanted to raise children in a let's just say a better world. So I'm an organic farmer. I live on an organic farm now with my 4 children. We have a soil association, so we work very, very closely with nature, and we farm with nature in the care for the planet, which is very, very important. We've been through, I didn't realise how challenging it was, but obviously on the same hand, kind of rewarding how it was. So challenging wise in terms of income, we didn't get much support because we were new into farming, and the area itself wasn't kind of a farming community. We have lots of farms around us, but they are more intensive farming. So the support was very, very kind of lonely. We were very isolated in the work we did. However, very meaningful and very important. And coming through out of work, we didn't get our support from the government. We wouldn't get universal credit or, tax credits or anything like that because of our previous income. And we purchased the farm literally by selling everything we had. So financially wise, we didn't start off with a very good financial start. The journey of farming itself, the discovery, and when we opened up the access to the farm and we opened up to the community, we could see that kind of need, how disconnected our generations were from where our food comes from, and the joy, and it's just, yeah, it's profound in the joy of obviously when you open up the farm to children and they come and grow food and they learn all about the food. So we knew it was kind of an important thing to do. But the financial side of it, unfortunately, left lots of many opportunities where we were choosing between feeding our children and obviously paying our mortgage, because it was really, really difficult. However, along our journey, we did. COVID was a bit of a spark for us in terms of seeing the need and the demand where people wanted to eat more locally grown produce. That did open up quite lots of opportunities, but at the same hand, once we went into COVID, we literally stopped our income overnight. We never got no income, no support, no nothing. So again, we was on that kind of line of just, we're having to sell the farm again in order, to make ends meet. However, we had good friends and family who supported us in that. So for having a basic income for farming, for food growing, for me is literally a lifeline and continuing the work, what we do. Because a lot of the work is kind of voluntary and we don't, the food to market as well. Being a farmer, you don't always get the best price, even though we're organic farming too. However, we've managed to make it sustainable through an education route, and we do a lot of education on the farm. We have over 1,000 children who access the farm every single year, learning and discovering about food and nature. But the well-being impacts from that too, and obviously mental health as well. Having that kind of not having that secure income every single month, wondering where it comes from. So when basic income campaign came about, I was like, wow, yes, definitely. Because if I'm in this position, I can imagine many, many other farmers are in this position too. And also as well with basic income for me, it will also give us so much time to free up. We don't get to go on holidays and stuff like that because we have to look after the farm, and workers as well into the farm. They see it as like an income where it's poverty kind of line. There's no money in farming, as they say. So in terms of trying to employ people, one, we haven't got the money to fund them, and two, it's also getting people on the land too. And yet we see so many children who access the farm really want to be a farmer when they grow up. They want to be a beekeeper. They want to look after nature. So knowing that you're going to have this basic income, it's going to be open up a gateway to many, many opportunities to let these children in, giving them an avenue of saying, look, can be a career, it can be a possibility. So that for me is what, something like this is so important. It's so important.
Thank you, Janine. Yeah, that was amazing. Yeah, thank you for sharing your story. We're going to pass over. I can do it. Neil Howard is a reader in international development at the University of Bath. He researches basic income and social transformation, including co-leading 2 pilots in South Asia. He's also a trustee of the Basic Income Earth Network and the global network bringing together basic income researchers and advocates. It would be lovely to hear from you, Neil, on sort of the context and why this might be important.
Cool, thank you very much. Thanks. First off, just like massive hat tip to all of you who have been involved in this. You in particular, Joe, for putting this together. I think it's epic. Likewise, Cleo, for your work in producing the report, Cleo. It's something that is super exciting, and indeed for bringing everybody together this evening. This is, as Dave said in the chat, a very decent turnout. So, yeah, thanks. I'm only going to talk for 4 or 5 minutes, and I'm going to attempt to have what I say weave together in a coherent fashion. It may not, though, and therefore you should be aware in advance that it could just go a bit like this and a bit like that. But I'll attempt for it to be coherent. The first thing I wanted to start with is one of my sort of favorite recently learned factoids, which feels very appropriate, is that the word radical etymologically derives from the Latin word for root, which in the context of this particular conversation feels particularly appropriate, but to me is also kind of liberating, because the word radicalism is so typically colonized by the right and the mainstream media, who associate it with it, associate the term with the mad, the insane, the sort of nutty, the unmoored from sensible strategy. But really, when we think of radicalism in terms of roots, to me, it gives us a chance to reclaim the profoundly sensible way of going about approaching the problems, the symptoms of which we make our lives more difficult and that we seek to ameliorate. So for me, radicalism and the radicalism inherent in this report and this effort is about ultimately addressing the systemic underlying root causes of the problems that plague our radical endeavor on you folks' part, to attempt to weave together various systemic structural issues that blight our societies, economies, and ecologies, and to offer a potentially bold sort of root cause addressing set of solutions. Secondly, I guess, in the end, it's quite clear from what you folks argue in the report, it's quite clear from anyone who has a sort of reasoned diagnosis of the ecological and economic crises we face, that inequality, concentrations of wealth, poverty, these things are all fundamentally interwoven, and they're all fundamentally determined by capitalism and its present operation. And just as folks can't reproduce themselves on the land, workers cannot contribute to the reproduction of the land itself and the food that the land produces. Likewise, people across certainly this society, but others, are unable to access decent food because of the lack of the money that is necessary to survive in a capitalist economy. So giving everybody that sort of solid material cash floor to stand on unconditionally through a basic income is a no-brainer. So for me, it's quite clear that this is a no-brainer. And what I really appreciate about what you folks are doing with this effort is to not just further emphasize how much of a no-brainer it is, but to take the conversation about what a no-brainer having enough money is into domains that for some time it hasn't really been present in. The conversation around basic income and basic income's emancipatory potential has kind of been most taken forward in recent decades by folks thinking about economic justice, whereas you folks are bringing economic and ecological justice together. And to me, that is profoundly politically full of potential. The Argentinian political theorist Ernesto Laclau argued in his analyses of populism and the construction of hegemony that what the right does terribly successfully is create chains of equivalence, basically bringing together disparate issue areas that coalitions can unite around, offering, if you will, a solution that may not initially appear as a solution to X problem, but to X, Y, and Z problem, and in the process building hegemonic coalitions. It feels to me that there's something of that in this effort. The bringing together of ecological justice and economic justice is obviously something that is advancing and has been advancing for some time, but particularly thinking through food sovereignty, food security, sustainability alongside economic and ecological justice. To me, it feels like there's fertile ground here. There's fertile possibilities, fertile terrain for uniting potentially disparate struggles, disparate groups pushing towards progressive change, and that is exciting. One of the other things that feels full of potential here is, and others who may know more about this and more about electoral politics more broadly, feel free to disagree. But certainly in my understanding of the UK, where I'm from, the rural vote is typically a Conservative vote. And the rural vote, of course, was mobilised in substantial ways during the Brexit referendum around an idea of taking back control and so on and so forth. We can leave aside the ironies of that and the success of that. But the fact that you are pulling together these seemingly different, disparate issue areas across seemingly disparate populations makes me wonder to what extent pushing forward this agenda might potentially fragment the sort of well-established bedrock of rightist coalition, and certainly the rural component of right-wing and conservative vote. Given that what is ultimately offered by a basic income is the material security that much of the rural workforce simply doesn't have, and many people who would like to be part of the rural workforce cannot be because they don't have. Couple of other small points before I stop. Within the basic income world, you know, the kind of the lodestar, if you like, the goal is ultimately economic, ecological, social justice for everybody, and the recognition that in a world of money, you can't really have that unless everybody has this solid floor, unless everybody's got money. As a result of which, certain folks within the basic income community will say, we shouldn't really be advocating for a basic income for X or a basic income for Y. We really need to be pushing universally. And I fundamentally agree with that. I think that there are very strong cases, there's ethical, moral, political, economic for everybody receiving. And at the same time, I think what we see, particularly from the US, where there's an enormous explosion of the movement towards guaranteed income and economic security, and through piloting and through the linking of what economic security through a basic income can give you and various other social or environmental problematics, what we see is an opening of the political terrain by virtue of focusing on particular constituencies. By which I mean focusing on basic income and farmers, basic income and access to the land, basic income and food security, alongside, for example, basic income for care leavers, as in Wales, or basic income for the homeless, I think has the potential to broaden the coalition ultimately by bringing people into the conversation around how important economic security is through whichever crisis or issue it is that they work on or are affected by. So once more, a hat tip to you folks. The last piece, I guess, would just be a nod to Tom Paine, right? I mean, the English revolutionary Tom Paine, not a native of, but certainly a long time resident of the fabulous place that is Lewis, is one of the first folks on record, and certainly more famous folks on record within the British political tradition to advocate for something like a basic income. And obviously in Tom Paine's time, the call for basic income was rooted in the recognition that basically people had been kicked off of their land. We live in a world now in which at least 50% of us live in cities and therefore don't necessarily associate our emancipation with having access to land that we can cultivate. But in the end, we live in the kind of historical relic of having been kicked off of the land and therefore being able to reproduce ourselves. And so there is something fundamentally tying the call for basic income for purposes of food security to this history of sort of radical English calls for economic democracy, of which Tom Paine and his work were sort of fundamental and quite exciting examples. So I think there's something really exciting about being able to link this to those roots as well. More to say, including I think about transition and land concentration and no doubt much more, but I'll save a bunch of that hopefully for the questions and hand over. So again, hat tip and thank you.
Thank you so much, Neil. We'll head over to Vibhor, who is a researcher and activist working on issues of social policy and community development. He runs an NGO in the tribal belts of Rajasthan, India, as well as researching basic income pilots in India and the UK. It'd be great to hear from you with your experience in the pilots, what this might mean for farmers.
Thanks, Jo. Really difficult to follow, really powerful and evocative statements from Neil and Janine. So thank you to both of you as well for really setting the tone. Wonderful turnout, as I think has been said. And really, I'm really enjoying actually all the conversation in the chat. I won't lie, I've spent quite a long time on this call just scrolling through and reading all the lovely things people are saying. I'm going to pick up sort of where Neil left. I very much grew up in the middle of Delhi, 20 million people, as disconnected from the realities of how our food comes from. You know, all those jokes of where does the food come from? The supermarket wasn't ever that bad, but the environment that I grew up in was as urban and disconnected as can be, and serves me right as I've now married into a farming and cheese-making family in the UK to atone for all of my urban sins most of my life. My interest in basic income and my work in basic income, as well as my work in the more rural parts of India, came very much from a desire, with a disgust with the lack of security and dignity that we give to people. So I'm going to set a little bit of context about India and farming before I go a little further into what basic income has done with farming. 50% of India's population is engaged in agriculture. For context, that's about 700 million people are currently working in agriculture in India. And they are eulogized. They are, the word is Annadatta, the god who gives you grain. And I'll tell you this with a fair amount of confidence, that any society anywhere in the world where they deify or eulogize a group, that group will always be in a position of disadvantage. Think about any culture that has female gods, women always have disadvantaged positions. Similarly with farmers, because the armed forces, any country that eulogizes armed forces never ends up actually caring a lot about the material condition. And farming is the same in India. We think of the tiller of the land as a savior, as a god, but the material conditions within which farming operates in India is actually extremely insecure, extremely precarious. As a result of that, what happens is that farming exists in extremely unprotected and unregulated markets. They are, another little bit of context, over 80%, 85% of Indian farmers are actually own landholdings under 2 hectares. So most of them are what are described as small and marginal farmers. We don't have the sort of large-scale industrial farming that exists in a large part of the Western world. And what that means for small farmers is that they are even more prone to climate vagaries, to the transactions involved in reaching the market and coming back from the market with their grain. And they are a far more vulnerable population in that end. And the final sort of data point that I'm going to throw to you just to set that context is in 2020, 2021, we had 10,000 farmers commit suicide owing to being in debt traps, owing to poor crop yields, owing to increased corporatization of agriculture. So that's the sort of situation within which farming operates. And slowly, but unsurprisingly, the government and civil society is starting to take note of the fact that actually unconditional cash is a surprisingly powerful tool for people who live in any form of vulnerability. So India has had a boom in direct unconditional cash transfers, including targeted schemes that the governments, both at the national and subnational level, exist for people who are engaged in farming. The exact definitions of this are slightly problematic because in some schemes, it's people who own agricultural land, and that as a result ends up excluding people who are tenant farmers, people who are agricultural but landless laborers, and unsurprisingly, most importantly, women, because a lot of land titles don't exist, are not held in the woman's name, even if the woman is the primary tiller of that land in these areas. However, at this point, there's almost 60 million families that are getting direct unconditional cash transfers from the government at one level or the other. And the results of this are so stark that the minute one party in one government in one small state in South India launched it, 4 others immediately took note, and the central government immediately took note, and the idea has spiraled. So to go back to sort of Neil's point around the sort of political efficiency of a scheme like this, is that in India, very quickly, the idea got such strong political currency that every party, both central and state level parties, are suddenly like, oh, this is a good idea, let's do this. Unsurprisingly, from in the states where these schemes are being run, there is a very clear and undeniable improvement in crop utility, in purchasing power, in debt cycles, in the productivity of the land. But more importantly, a number of two major basic income pilots that I've closely observed that are in rural areas. And these aren't just basic income for farmers, but they are unconditional cash transfers for entire villages, the predominant demographic of which are farmers, is that you start to see very quickly that just because they are farmers, their needs are not just farm related. They exist in positions of vulnerability and precarity as a result of being in farming, but their needs are often needing to fix something in their house. As Janine mentioned, being able to feed the kids, being able to buy a certain equipment, which could be for the house, it could be for the farm. And the beauty of cash as the fungible good that it is that it gives people back that control of how best to address the biggest pain point in their life. And just this morning, I was in a meeting where somebody was showing a video from one of these pilots, and there was a farmer who was, as the camera was panning to him, he was walking into his field and he was saying, you know, I don't walk into my field with my head held down because I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I've got some money in the bank and I know there's more coming. So I walk with my head held high because I don't need to look towards the money lender. And that stayed with me all day from just this morning. It's a video I hadn't seen before. but it's a really powerful line, and I'm going to sort of leave it at that. And again, hat tip to everyone for all the effort that you've managed to put together to come here. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much for that was amazing to share.
For folks, please do start popping them in the chat. I'm gonna start asking a couple of questions to our wonderful panelists myself, dominating this conversation with my loud voice for another few minutes, but then we're really keen to hand over to you. So my first question is around this eligibility issue, and I wonder if anyone from our panel so far has any ideas of how do you make this fair? Of course, universal basic income is fair because it is universal, but when you're taking the universality piece out of it or targeting that universality to a smaller group, how do you work around that? I'm very happy to just let folks jump in.
I'll go first because I can just be non-committal and say it's really difficult. I think the Indian example, as well as a few others that I'm hearing about in Latin America, are testament to how difficult it is to draw these boundaries. The three big Indian schemes, one of them is using the land holding data, which meant that they had to do a massive reform of the current land records, and then were able to deliver this to everyone who owns agricultural land. Obviously, owning agricultural land is very different from tilling agricultural land. So lots of people who actually have nothing to do with farming, but have just lots of intergenerational wealth, also receive this scheme. And that is always a problem with any sort of targeting. Another scheme tried to be slightly more robust about this, and they therefore used multiple crop production databases that they had. So in a particular area, they would find the paddy production database, the rice production database, and try to find who is bringing this to the market, who is registered as the seller of the. And along with that, they also had to genuinely put boots on the ground. So this state government had 50,000 people deployed for the sole task of identification of who are farmers. And then, so it is a really difficult task, is I suppose what I'm trying to begin by saying. And I don't know if that's potentially being negative or dispiriting, but I just want to highlight also the current solutions that are being employed. And I think, as with any good identification scheme, nothing beats boots on the ground. But again, the last challenge there is how do you define a farmer? As somebody put in the chat, as you were putting this in, what about people who are running community garden projects and other volunteer-based cooperative collective movements? So yeah, that's my 2-bit.
Love it. And difficult, I don't think, is something that people doing farm work shy away from. So I think this is something we're up to the challenge. And speaking of, Janine, you've got your hand up, please.
Just obviously back up what we're saying then. I think, yeah, I sort of thought about the eligibility, but then you think about someone myself, I'm a small scale farmer. We started off new entrants into farming, so we're very small scale. So when we entered our kind of farming community, everybody around us were big landowners, and they were already in the system, in the EU agricultural policy system. So they were getting money, lots of money, depending on how much land they own. So it took us a good 9 years before we got any support through DEFRA, because we were small. We wasn't in that kind of big land growing, micro growing, or fodder growing and stuff like that. We were literally a small market garden growing a huge variety of vegetables. So I think really it needs to be looked at when we look at eligibility. We need to be looking at the work, what's being done on that land. If I'm honest with you, looking from that point of view of the benefit to, the impacts they're having on their community, what it is, the impact they're having on the environment, and what kind of access, they're providing to the local people. So I just think, we need to be looking at a more kind of small kind of framework and then growing it from that, because if we can have loads of land, not do anything with it, no benefit to the wildlife and degraded soils and all that lot, which it has been, and getting paid a massive amount of money. So that's how I think the criteria needs to be defined.
Amazing. Yeah, lots of food for thought there. Question from Colin on eligibility is how you sort of deal with seasonal workers, especially migrants. is it a citizen's basic income? Neil, I wonder if you had anything to come in on that, or perhaps other parts of it.
I mean, look, my own instinct on this is that the inclusion and exclusion criteria are so difficult to operationalize in a just way that really the only just thing is for there to be none. And so for me, I think the obvious answer is for this to be a universal scheme. But for me, the value of the political value of pushing for a UBI for farmers is in it resides in how that can open the door to a UBI for everybody, by illustrating how important it would be or transformative it would be. So I think from the perspective of sort of taking this struggle further forward, or further steps forward in this advocacy, I can imagine a pilot in which you have the challenges of inclusion and exclusion are still there, but because it's a pilot and temporary, they are fundamentally just less important. Basically, it's not to say that they don't carry weight. It matters to people whether they're included or excluded, but you can acknowledge in the design of a pilot that this is an experiment, or this is a demonstration, this is for advocacy purposes. And so, these are the limitations that we work with. And then, of course, the question is, what is going to be most politically oomphy? Is it going to be trialing this in one whole geography, for example, or with a population that can't farm but would like to farm as part of a transition or go back to the land type of strategy? But at the political level, adopting this as a policy, without wishing to be sort of a bit of a dampener, I can't see a viable just way that is not fully universal.
Thanks, Neil. Well, this is exactly what we're hoping to explore, I suppose, in this next phase.
One other piece on the citizenship question. So there's almost no meaningful work within the UBI space on what you do with people who are non-citizens. And those who have tried to tackle this have basically said it should just be for citizens. Like the complexities of navigating a system of tax and spend, of redistribution, which ultimately is what a basic income would be, are so great that trying to account for and then mitigate the effects of influxes of folks from elsewhere are so great that we should not give it to them. There's an obvious kind of like human rights counter to that, and particularly when we're thinking about the rural economy and how fundamental farm workers are, then the injustices are potentially really, really great, and the potential beneficial outcomes of UBI might be quite offset by ensuring that only goes to citizens. Therefore, people push often in the direction of residents, people who are normally resident in a place, whether that be the rural community or whether that be the wider polity. My own instinct is that you would need that at a minimum if you were going to avoid the injustices of excluding people based on citizenship.
Thank you, Neil. Encouraging once again for folks to think about questions or comments and stick them in the chat so we know who to call on if folks are happy to speak up for themselves. Completely understand that. Emma Bella, I was wondering if you would be happy, and if you're not, then that's totally fine. But you've mentioned linking the eligibility conversation with the revised ELMS scheme and the criteria for them. I wonder if you have any initial ideas for that, perhaps, as well as that as a question. If you're asking that question, I feel like you might have some good ideas on that. I'll give it a few moments for you to unmute and speak if you're happy or comfortable doing that, and if not, that's totally fine. We can just move on.
Hi, sorry, my reception isn't very good. Yeah, I don't know loads about it, but I do know that there's been a lot of really in-depth and like wide-ranging discussion on like how to kind of incorporate small farms into ELMS payments. And they've had like a lot of input from small farmers and, just like really good discussion across like, it's been very like a lot of representation from a lot of, diverse voices. And that kind of complex discussion, it's almost like that's been sort of, they've been having that type of eligibility discussion, but for something else, for these ELMS payments. And I just wondered whether like, that some of the learnings from that could come through in the eligibility conversation for this UBI, basically. I'm not like an expert or anything. I know that work has been done. It's been really comprehensive, and like, you know, colleagues have been involved and stuff. So I just thought, you know, I would just ask about it. Yeah. By the way, this is amazing. Anyway, thanks.
Thank you so much. Your connection was totally loud and clear, more than can be said for myself. And yeah, I think that's absolutely a path to make sure that we're digging into as much as possible and learning, you know, not duplicating work, going from best practice, and also keeping an eye out for how we can improve on what is currently understood as best practice. I'm going to hand over to Jo to eke out some questions and some comments and some insights from you folks. But thanks so much for patience with presentation, but also for energy in the chat so far.
Yeah, so we kind of rolled in the panel discussion and a bit of question and answer session there. So if what I would really love to do, because I'm really conscious that we've got loads of people in this virtual room who have tons of experience and wisdom from your own lived experience. I was wondering if anyone felt comfortable sharing how a basic income might impact their work or their life as a farm worker, farmer, or farm producer, food producer. So if anyone did want to share how this policy idea might impact them, it would be really cool if you felt like doing so, to raise your hand and then I can go to you. In the meantime, I will sort of talk on a little bit about sort of, yeah, our next steps and maybe what you can do to get involved. So yep, currently not funded in any capacity. It's a voluntary working group, and then the immense support of Cleo from Autonomy. So we are looking for funding. If anyone has any ideas about pots that can be helpful for us, that would be amazing to know about. We want to work on a policy proposal for the devolved governments and how that might interact with environmental schemes or different incentives that are going on in those different devolved governments. And then we will be like looking at feasibility and funding to start modeling and looking at pilots and what a pilot in the UK would look like. Sort of, are we going to look at a bioregion? Are we going to focus on one like concentrated local food system, or are we going to do sort of nationwide? And maybe, I don't know, combination. We have to do the modeling and feasibility on that, which will be a really exciting part to be involved with. And obviously we're going to come out and talk to as many people, farm workers, food producers, farm workers, as possible. So that will be definitely something everyone can get involved with. And basically after this, we would love people to read the report. It's quite chunky, but hopefully it's readable. And let us know what you think. Like, was there anything we missed out? Was there anything you would include if you were in our position? It will only strengthen our work. And Emma has raised their hand. So yeah, Emma, if you wanted to share what a basic income would do for you and give us an intro of what you're doing work-wise, that would be amazing.
Yeah, hang on. Yes, I just wanted to say that I've just recently, I'm in the process of retraining in regenerative horticulture at Black Mountains College. And I think we all recognise that one of the barriers to entry for this as an area to work in is the money and how you make it pay. And the project I want to set up is a community food project locally, because we have a lot of food inequity locally. We have a lot of people having to use food banks, and food bank use since COVID has gone up massively. So we've been given a bit of land, to about an acre, a bit more, to set up a project on. But how do I make that happen? I'm an organizer by heart, and I'm about obviously to have some training, and I've got people who will mentor me. But how do I make that pay? And actually really make a difference? If I'm just going to be an occasional volunteer, and because I'm going to have to go off and make my living doing something else, all that training will go, to nothing. So a UBI would make a huge difference.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing, Emma. And yeah, if anyone else wants to share sort of how it would impact them, just raise your hand and I'll see that you've done that. For now, we've had a question in the chat from Reinhard. Reinhard, do you want to ask your question, or do you want me to read it out?
Whatever is easiest, I can ask the question. Or
yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, basically, my question is to all the speakers. I sort of see the biggest problem. I mean, here we probably are also in a group of people who are more or less convinced or about basic income. But how do we deal with the politics of basic income? Not the policy, the politics of opponents who create various stories about basic income in order to undermine the credibility. And my question is particularly directed at Vibor from India, because you said there were some quite interesting and successful programs in India. So my question is, why did it not lead to a sort of storm of support and demand? We want a basic income now. So what do you think are the sort of barriers or the tricks of the trade, political trade, to undermine it, and what can we do to overcome them? Thank you.
I'll take a punt at answering that question, Reinhard. Thank you. And I think it's an important question, and I know Neil alluded to it. How do we make political coalitions from the groundswell of movement and from the evidence that we get from these movements? And I think I'll answer it in two parts. One, there was a growing movement after the first such scheme was announced that this should be replicated. And that's why it started off at one subnational unit, which we call states in India. And then within a year of its implementation, the national government had already implemented it. So there is theoretically an unconditional cash transfer program, building on which then multiple other subnational governments have started to build their programs. So there is some sort of movement and recognition that unconditional cash transfer helps. What we're seeing in India currently is a growing movement of fragmented but unconditional and targeted cash transfer projects. So one subnational government will run 7 different schemes, one for farmers, one for low-cost students, one for whatever. And we are currently in the process as activists trying to talk to governments, trying to talk to politicians, especially as elections are approaching, to try to solidify these otherwise fragmented streams, try to streamline them. Obviously, politics is a game of many different battles. It's about the language and the framing and what you call something, and who you target it for, and at what time, and what you're saying are the alternatives. But we are currently trying to say, look, there's obviously appetite, there's obviously electoral success, and there's obviously money to give unconditional cash to these groups of people. Why not just broaden this base? And it's happening. So the most recent announcement has been a cash transfer, an unconditional cash transfer for all women. That's at least half the population in one state, theoretically, will now get. And the chief minister's comment was, look, it's for everyone. My mother will get it, and got a big laugh out of it. So I think it's an incremental movement. And I think going back to Neil's point, if you start building coalition, you start showing evidence, and somehow the magic of politics and all of our efforts in conversations like this make it work. Sorry, that went on much longer than I wanted it to, but yeah.
I'm just going to add one
which
thing.
state it is where the women will get it? Which
Yep.
state of India?
The state of Karnataka. I'll put in the link.
Karnataka, okay.
A couple of very brief pieces to add to this. So the story in South Africa is relatively similar to the story in India, in that sort of a plethora of smaller scale, targeted, but still unconditional cash transfer interventions were kind of woven together, and the issue nature or the issue-based targeting saw large organizations weave them together in this sort of hegemonic coalition. Basically, this parallels that were being drawn between this issue and that issue and this issue, and the evidence base obviously being built up about how impactful unconditionality was and cash itself is, laid the foundation basically for building coalitions. Critically, unions got on board. And I think one of the key pieces here will be getting, as it is anywhere, given that they are one of the sort of last bastions of large working class power, is getting unions on board and helping unions to understand that unconditionality, universality isn't going to lead people to be work shy and undermine worker power, but actually, quite to the contrary, is more likely to enhance worker power precisely by giving people the chance to resist shitty work. And this comes back, I think, to Emma's point about how do we support people who want to, be proactive in any sphere of progressive politics? Well, an obvious answer is basic income. And so I think part of the task of civil society, which obviously includes unions, is supporting each of the many different overlapping social struggles that exist to understand and recognize that at heart, having economic security offers the ability to potentially organize better. It doesn't fix everything. Not all of our social ills will be fixed by a basic income, but because we live in a cash-based society, because we live under capitalism, having a basic income would help fix all of the other problems more easily. And that linkage, I think, is quite critical.
Brilliant.
I had a couple of thoughts on this, if I'm allowed, if that's okay for me to jump in. So,
yeah.
For me, I think political pathways always involve going in with what you think a perfect idea is, and then compromising. And I think that's why Neil's steadfastness in the only fair way is universal, is something that I totally agree with, but I'm happy to compromise on if it means we can do something for people in the short term. And that's kind of what I think targeting basic incomes is about. I think it makes it more palatable. Again, it's this like threading it, weaving it in with another issue that the case maybe for supporting or more support is already made. Like for example, the Welsh pilot for care leavers, there was a real commitment to doing better by care leavers in Wales. There was an interest in basic income. They came together, and now 641 young people in Wales are receiving a basic income right now. And that's why I think that this is a really important opportunity, because it feels feasible. It feels like there's a moment now where that we can sort of capitalize on the work that lots of farmers are doing to show that the way that they are currently being treated and supported by policy is not acceptable, and do something in the short term that addresses that using the principles of basic income, of it being an unconditional payment, it being income from a source that is not just labor. Targeting makes it less fair than universal, but it's more fair than, it's fairer than the current system. And I think that is how we capitalize on that. And, iterating and improving over time, but doing something in the short term rather than being completely wedded to perfection and the long term, maybe to short term happening is a very important part of that political pathway, in my opinion, which is again why I think pilots are useful, because you can put cash in people's pockets in the short term now, and at least those people that are participating in them get to live their lives with that boost from the cash.
Thanks, Theo. And I think we had a question from Dave on sort of devolved governments. Are you okay to ask that question, Dave?
Yeah, I can. So as I'm not a farmer or involved in it, but I'm involved in food and academia. But I live in Wales, and the perennial discussion around anything to do with policy in Wales is around about devolution. So if we think about the potential of a basic income being paid by the centralized government, the central government, possibly through a mechanism such as the DWP, but farming is devolved policy regions. How do we balance those two areas?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it's hard to conceptualize a basic income for farmers as social security, despite it being about financial security. I think it's more of like a labor intervention, right? It's almost more of like an entrepreneurial policy in my mind, the way that it would be designed and assessed. And I think pilots, again, have a utility here. Like a devolved nation could do a pilot, perhaps, if it came up with as a social security permanent policy, that wouldn't be feasible for a devolved nation. But if it was an agricultural policy, then it would be. And if it was a pilot, then it would be. So again, this is part of being sensible about this political pathway. And that's, that is one of the key questions that we had highlighted to us from partners, that's something that we need to get really solid on. Like, where does this fit into policy making? Is it a social security policy or not? And mealy mouthed answer to it in the short term, but one that I'm hoping we'll get really crystal clear on.
Any other questions for our panel, for any of us? Any questions about next steps? Any thoughts about who we need to be chatting to that we might not have considered? Do pop them in the chat. Lucy just made a comment saying, language is important in this context, like welfare being called benefits. And we really want to be clear sort of with our work that we're not suggesting that any sort of benefits are taken away or any of the financial incentives for farmers are removed. We want this to literally just go as a foundational flaw that will only support them and not take anything away. Yeah, investment, Lucy says. Cleo, I don't think we actually saw the cover of the report. I don't know.
Did it not load? Okay, let me pull that out. That's such a shame that I was doing a big reveal and it was only to myself. I'll get that up in one moment. Is that more viewable this time? You can see the beautiful cover. Excellent. Yeah, and the next, we'll make sure that you have this full report for your perusal in your inboxes over the next few days, but it's been really fantastic to be able to share some insights. Well, yeah, this content with you today and get some initial feedback, and we'll make sure we keep in touch about this next phase and answering these big questions. But please do, yeah, give it a read, give us your feedback, and when you've had a bit of time to ruminate, have a think about yeah, where we need to go next and how you're going to join us there. Have we had Emma? We've had a question from you. Thank you. So could UBI be used as an incentive to encourage farmers to transition to nature-friendly and regenerative agriculture? I've asked the question, so I'm going to invite my colleagues to come to answer. In fact, Joe, I'm going to invite you to answer this actually, or at least.
Yeah, so on the basis of the report and the farm workers and food producers we spoke with, a lot of them did say they wanted to make changes towards transition towards more regenerative practices, but there was like high upfront costs, and sort of changing certain mechanisms would mean they'd need more labor on the farm, and then they can't actually afford to pay that labor. So in our vision, yes, a basic income for farmers would provide people with that security so that they can take more risks. Thank you, Claire. Yes, yeah, so in our view, yeah, we think basic income for farmers would be a really, really crucial foundation to enable people to take the time and look forward and start planning to make a transition towards more sustainable and regenerative practices.
Janine, from your experience, do you have anything you wanted to add in on this?
Yeah, no, definitely. A lot of the local farmers we have meetings with on a regular basis. Now, bearing in mind, we have a small scale, they are a large scale. And, you know, we hear of many farmers just actually selling the farm because of the fact that they can't make that transition financially, you know, because the whole kind of transition and basic payment scheme now has been slashed by a good third now. So already the farmers are struggling to make that transition into more regenerative farming or even organic practices. So, yeah, 100% on that.
Thank you. A great question from Alison there of the difference between a basic income and a grant. I wonder if any of our colleagues who have worked on cash transfers and basic income pilots have an insight on that.
I mean, a grant is usually one-off and not recurring. A basic income is in perpetuity. So the kind of core difference is that a basic income is like a basic income is basically a pension, but for everyone. That's the way that I would like to think of it. A pension is like an easy concept that at this point we all understand, and a basic income is just an extension of that to all people. And so the difference is that it goes on in a way that a grant doesn't. That said, you know, there are child grants which can continue to go on. So depending on who you're talking to and how they tend to frame it and what they understand by those two terms, there doesn't have to be a difference. There's a whole other world of sort of research and advocacy that says that actually the kind of great transition supporting social justice enhancing way to redistribute wealth in our societies isn't through a basic income, it's through like large cash grants that sort of start people off at the age of 18, for example, going off to university or to invest in businesses. And there is a decent amount of evidence that giving people larger grants as opposed to regularized grants or regularized cash injections like a basic income has the potential to be more transformative. I think these things ultimately aim to achieve different things. Basic income is about providing security in perpetuity, and a sort of substantive citizenship grant, or however one likes to frame it, is about supporting substantial life transitions, the setting up of a business, moving into farming. And my own view is that the two could work together so long as we're willing to redistribute wealth enough, which is obviously fundamental in the present state of the world.
Alison, please.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to respond to that. I was looking at the results coming out of the Kenyan project, the Give Directly project, where they gave a long-term UBI, well, it was universal for the whole village for 12 years. Well, they're going to be giving it for 12 years, and they're giving it for 2 years to another group, and they're giving a lump sum to another group. And what the conclusions were was the people who fared best were the people who either got the lump sum, who thought they were going to get it for a long time, thought they're going to get basic income for a long time. And as somebody who's thinking about pilots in Greater Manchester, it worries me, this idea of a short-term pilot. Is it actually a basic income, or is it a lump sum spread out over 24 months, or do you know what I mean? So I think when you're getting down to the nitty-gritty of what a pilot is and what it tells us, I think these are things we have to think about. So that's why it might sound a daft question, is, you know, what's the difference between that and a grant? But I want what you want, Neil. I want us all to head towards a universal basic income in perpetuity, but I want the pilots to take us there.
Yeah, I'm totally with you, and I think that my honest sense is that you're probably better off advocating for both. I think that the danger, grants are great. There's no two ways about it, and there is plenty of research, including the Kenyan stuff, that says that in the context of, in a non-UBI world where you've participated in a pilot and then you go back to life outside of a pilot, arguably a grant is better because you get it all at once. You can invest in something, a productive asset. You buy a cow, you buy a car, you do whatever. But what that doesn't do is simulate the world as if it were in the counterfactual conditions of a basic income. So if the political goal of your pilot is to show people, just look how fucking transformative it is not being skinned every month and being able to, like, look my children in the eyes and be able to tell them there's going to be enough food on the table, then even if it's time bound, there's just great weight to a pilot that just kind of regularizes payment. But if what you're wanting is to show the kind of like a quick, hard, fast, but very real transformative power of a substantive investment, then you go the grant route. I couldn't say one is better than the other, but I'd be really wary. I don't think we're at the point in this country, obviously, of having made the case strong enough or wide enough or effectively enough around universality and unconditionality to move in the grant direction. That's my sense, recognizing that both would be ideal.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. Yeah, there's a line in the Welsh Basic Income Pilot update that sort of acknowledges that the first payment of a 2-year basic income pilot will be experienced differently by the people receiving it than the last payment, because by the end you've had that every month for 2 months, so you know what it's like to have that land in your bank account, you know what it's like to use that money and depend on that money, whereas the first payment you don't know that. And that, yeah, and then because it ends, that is more like a grant spread over 24 months. However, their transformative potential, and that's what their, you know, their assessment of pilots show, that there is an impact there. So doing them is not only useful from an evidence base and case making perspective, but from an actually putting cash in people's pockets and letting them make their decisions around it with that extra cash there, which I think is really important. Yeah, I think at the moment we've said in the report that pilots of any scale could be designed in a beneficial way, and I think that is definitely true, and that would need to be done carefully and in collaboration with the right people and picking the right places. But you know, a policy pilot more akin to like you know, the way that Scotland but tested out minimum unit pricing on alcohol in Scotland. The policy pilot was a national policy of just rolling that out and being like, well, we'll see what it's like in a couple of years and see if it's worked, but it's a much stronger commitment to that policy because it's basically been rolled out and then would have to be unrolled out, you know, rolled back up if they decided that it wasn't working. but it feels like, you know, that kind of policy pilot, you know, it's still a pilot, but it's much more comprehensive. I think we're going to be finishing up in the next couple of minutes. So if anyone has any final pieces they want to say, whether from our panel or from everyone else, we'd love to hear them. Joe, you should definitely get a final 2 cents in.
Yeah, I guess just to sort of solidify where we're at, I know we've sort of gone out and thought about the future of basic income for farmers, but right now in the UK, 95% of young farmers believe mental health is the biggest hidden danger in the sector. And 49% of farmers in the UK fear that their businesses are going to fail in 2024. So I guess to bring it back into reality, we need something quite urgent to enable farmers to keep farming in the UK and to support our food security. So we would really, appreciate all your support in sort of raising the profile of what we're doing and pushing for politicians and organisations to hear about a basic income for farmers. So we will all benefit in the long run if that's the case. But yeah, just a massive thank you for everyone for taking the time out this evening to be here and listen to us talk about this kind of big idea that can be a bit overwhelming, but also hopefully really exciting. And yeah, that's sort of what drives me, is hope and the feeling that we can make a better world. And I believe that it is really possible, especially with all of your support. So yeah, thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to sort of interacting and talking to you more in the future. I'll pop the email. I think everyone's might have got our email, but I'll pop our UPI for Farmers email in the chat if anyone does want to follow up with anything. That would be lovely.
Thank you, everyone, and I'll make sure to send the report to everyone that signed up to this event and any other follow-up information. Thanks again for your energy. Yeah, again, hat tip to Joe for all of your work and for sharing this energy with us. Thank you so much for your time this evening. Au revoir.
Thanks, everybody, and well done.
Thank you. Good night.